I had just spent 6 uninterrupted hours behind the wheel, fighting rain-soaked roads and heavy traffic. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the house I lived in with my husband, Daniel Morgan. My shoulders throbbed with pain, and my fingers were stiff from clutching the steering wheel for so long. All I wanted was to step inside and feel a sense of safety, even if only for a few minutes. I hoped Daniel might still be awake. I hoped he would ask me how my trip went. That small hope was the only thing keeping me upright as I stepped out of the car. But the house was completely dark. Not a single light was on. There was no porch light welcoming me home, no soft glow spilling through the windows. The house looked empty, almost deserted, as if no one had been there for days. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I unlocked the door and walked inside. The air felt stale, heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed all day. As I dragged my suitcase across the floor, the wheels echoed loudly through the silence. Daniel always left the television running, even if he wasn't watching it. His mother, Linda, always kept a lamp on in the living room. But now there was nothing, no sound, no light, no movement. I called out their names. Daniel, Linda, no one answered. A slow, tightening sensation wrapped around my chest. Something was very wrong. My name is Rachel Morgan. I am 35 years old and I work in corporate finance. I was the person who covered most of the expenses in that house. I was the one who kept everything functioning, everything paid for, everything stable. And yet, standing alone in that dark living room, I felt like an outsider in my own life. I walked toward the kitchen, hoping to see at least some sign that they had been there recently. That was when I noticed a sheet of white paper sitting on the table, held in place by a salt shaker. My heart began to race as I reached for it. I had no idea that a single piece of paper was about to shatter everything I believed about my marriage and my family. I picked it up and immediately recognized my husband Daniel's sloppy handwriting. Beside it was the neat, precise script of his mother, Linda. They had both signed the note, as if what they were saying was completely reasonable. The message was brief but chilling. It said they needed to get away for a while to clear their minds. It explained that they had gone on a trip together and would not be answering their phones. And at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, it instructed me to take care of the old woman in the back room. That old woman was Daniel's grandmother, Margaret Hale. My fingers trembled as I reread the note. There was no concern expressed for her condition, no instructions about meals or medication. They had simply walked out and left her behind, as though she were a broken piece of furniture that no one wanted anymore. Something sharp twisted inside my chest. Fear and anger surged so quickly that it made me dizzy. Margaret had suffered a stroke 3 years earlier. She could barely walk. On most days, she barely spoke at all. She depended on others for nearly everything, and now she had been abandoned. I checked the time on my phone. It was close to midnight. That meant Daniel and Linda had been gone for almost 2 full days. 2 days without water, 2 days without food, 2 days without assistance. I dropped my suitcase and ran down the hallway toward the back room. My legs felt heavy, but my heart was pounding wildly. I was terrified of what I might find. As I reached for the door handle, one horrifying thought repeated over and over in my mind. What if I was already too late? I pushed the door open, and an awful smell hit me immediately. The room was small and dark, with no open window and no fresh air circulating. The stench of sweat, soiled sheets, and something far worse made my stomach churn. In the middle of the room stood a narrow bed. Lying on it was Margaret Hale. She looked nothing like the woman I remembered. Her skin was pale and dry, her lips were cracked. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was already dead. I rushed to her side and touched her hand. It was cold, far too cold. "Oh my God," I whispered. I ran back to the kitchen, filled a glass with warm water and grabbed a spoon. I returned quickly and gently lifted her head, carefully letting small sips of water slip between her lips. At first, there was no response. Then she coughed weakly and swallowed. I continued slowly, terrified of causing her harm. Tears streamed down my face as I watched her drink like someone who had been stranded in the desert. After that, I brought a towel and cleaned her face and hands. I changed her clothes, using the cleanest ones I could find. Every movement felt urgent, painful, and heavy with disbelief. One thought kept repeating in my mind. How could Daniel do this? How could Linda do this? This was their own family. As I worked, guilt crushed my chest. I had gone on that business trip to earn money for that house. Money that supported Daniel's lifestyle. Money that was meant to help care for Margaret. And while I was gone, they had left her to die. I stood up, ready to call for emergency help. She needed a hospital, doctors, someone to save her. That was when her hand suddenly clamped around my wrist. I froze. Her grip was not weak. It was firm. Steady, I looked down and saw that Margaret's eyes were open. They weren't the dull, unfocused eyes I had grown used to. They were sharp, alert, watching me closely. "Do not take me to the hospital," she said clearly, in a low but steady voice. My heart leapt into my throat. For a moment, I wondered if exhaustion was making me hallucinate. Margaret had not spoken a full sentence in years. She pulled my wrist closer. "Help me," she said. "Help me make them pay. They have no idea who I truly am." Her voice was calm, but there was something cold and powerful beneath it. I stared at her, unable to move. This was not the fragile, fading woman everyone believed her to be. She told me to lock the door and draw the curtains shut. My hands shook as I obeyed without question. Then she pointed to the corner of the room, toward an old dresser filled with her clothes. "Move it," she said. I hesitated, but the intensity in her eyes made me comply. I shoved the dresser aside and noticed a section of the floor that looked different from the rest. "Lift that board," she instructed. I knelt down and used my house key to pry it open. What I found beneath changed everything. Hidden under the loose floorboard was a narrow compartment. Inside sat a small wooden box, old, yet carefully polished. It looked completely out of place in that filthy room. Margaret told me to bring it to her. My hands trembled as I lifted the box and placed it on her lap. She opened it with slow, confident movements. Inside were several small bottles filled with dark liquid and a few unusual-looking pills. Without hesitation, she picked up one of the bottles and drank from it. No water, no pause. I tried to stop her, but she raised her hand. "Just wait," she said. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then her breathing began to deepen. It grew stronger. Color slowly returned to her face. I watched in shock as she sat upright on the bed by herself. Her back straightened, her shoulders lifted. The weak, broken woman was vanishing before my eyes. I stepped back, stunned. She looked at me and smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "Now you will learn the truth." She stood and walked toward the wall. Behind an old calendar was a hidden switch. When she pressed it, a quiet mechanical sound filled the room. Part of the wall slowly slid open. Behind it was a brightly lit space filled with screens, wires, and control panels, something straight out of a movie. "This is where I watch everything," she said. My legs nearly gave out as I followed her inside. I was about to discover what truly happened in my own home while I was away. The hidden room was cold and brightly illuminated. Multiple screens covered the far wall, each showing a different part of the house. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, even the front yard. Margaret sat in a chair in front of the monitors like someone completely at ease, as if she had done this countless times. She pressed a button, and one screen displayed a recording from earlier that day. Linda appeared on the couch, eating chips and watching television. In the corner of the screen, Margaret sat silently in her wheelchair. Then Linda stood up, irritation written all over her face. She walked over and kicked the wheelchair violently. I gasped as Margaret's body jerked from the impact. Linda leaned down and screamed at her, calling her a useless burden, cursing her for wasting money. She spat on the plate of food and shoved it toward her mouth. My hands shook as I covered my face. Margaret played another recording. This time, it showed Daniel in the living room with a woman I recognized as his so-called cousin, Olivia. They were sitting far too close. Daniel laughed and wrapped an arm around her. He told Olivia that once the old woman died, everything would be his. He said I was nothing more than a paycheck. He said he would throw me out and marry Olivia. Then Olivia asked about the medicine Margaret was taking. Daniel smiled and said it would slowly weaken her until she finally passed away. My chest felt crushed. Every dollar I had given him for care, every hour of overtime, every sacrifice, it had all been a lie. Margaret watched me quietly as I stood there crying. "Now you understand," she said. "They are not careless, they are killers." Something inside me hardened. I was done being blind. I was done being used. I was ready to fight back. Margaret turned off the screens and looked at me steadily. "What you saw is only part of the truth," she said. She explained that her weakness had been an act. For years, she had pretended to be helpless to see who would care for her and who would wait for her death. Daniel and Linda had failed that test in the worst possible way. Then she revealed who she truly was. Margaret Hale was not a poor old widow surviving on a small pension. She was the founder and chairwoman of a powerful financial empire that controlled banks, real estate holdings, and investment firms across multiple states. Everything Daniel thought he owned existed only because she allowed it. The house, his job, the money, even the car he drove, all of it belonged to her. I could barely breathe as I listened. She reached for my hand. "You were the only one who treated me like a human being," she said. "That is why I trust you." Her voice softened for the first time. "I want you to help me finish this," she said. "They tried to kill me. They tried to use you. Now it is time they face the truth." I wiped my tears and nodded. For the first time in years, I did not feel weak. I felt strong. Within an hour, Margaret had made a single phone call, not to Daniel, not to Linda, but to someone who answered her with respect. By dawn, a man named Gregory Shaw arrived at the house. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit and carried a leather case. He introduced himself as Margaret's personal attorney. The moment he saw her standing and fully alert, he bowed slightly. "We have much to do. Chairwoman Hale," he said. From that moment on, everything moved fast. Gregory made phone calls. Teams arrived. Workers began removing Daniel and Linda's furniture from the house. Their clothes, their junk, everything that did not belong to Margaret was taken out. New furniture was brought in. Clean walls, bright lights. The house began to look completely different, like it was waking up after years of being asleep. Margaret sat in the center of it all, giving quiet instructions. She looked powerful and calm. Gregory explained to me that legally the house was not in Daniel's name. It belonged to a foundation Margaret controlled. Daniel and Linda had no rights to it at all. That meant they had nowhere to return to. My phone buzzed. Margaret nodded toward it. "It is time to invite them back," she said. With shaking hands, I typed a message to Daniel. I told him that Margaret was not breathing, that her body was cold, that I was scared and did not know what to do. Then I pressed send. We waited in silence watching the phone. We all knew he would answer, and we all knew his answer would seal his fate. It did not take long. My phone vibrated on the table. I picked it up and opened the message while Gregory and Margaret watched. Daniel wrote that I should not panic. He told me not to call anyone, not the neighbors, not the police, not an ambulance. "Just wrap her in a sheet and leave her in the back room," he wrote. "I will deal with it later. I am busy right now." There was no sadness in his words, no shock, no concern, only inconvenience. I read the message out loud. Gregory's face tightened in disgust. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, cold and steady. "That was all we needed," she said. I replied to Daniel with a simple message. "All right, I will take care of everything here." Then I put the phone down. The trap was now complete. They believed they had won. They had no idea they were walking straight into their own destruction. That night, the house was completely dark again. The new furniture, the polished floors, the elegant curtains were all hidden in shadow. Only a few small lights glowed quietly in the corners. Margaret sat in a tall armchair in the living room. She looked nothing like the sick old woman they had left behind. She was dressed in a simple but elegant suit, her silver hair neatly styled. Gregory stood nearby, calm and silent. I sat beside her, my heart beating fast. We heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Then voices Daniel, Linda, and Olivia. They were laughing, complaining about the long drive, talking about food and showers. The front door opened. Daniel stepped inside first, dragging his suitcase. Linda followed, then Olivia. The room was still dark. "Rachel," Daniel called. "Why is it so dark in here? Where are you?" I did not answer. He found the light switch and flipped it on. The crystal chandelier lit up the entire room. They froze. Their eyes moved across the shining floors, the new furniture, the tall windows, and finally to the center of the room. Margaret sat there calmly, holding a cup of tea. Two large men in black suits stood behind her. Linda screamed and dropped her bags. Olivia stepped back in shock. Daniel's face turned pale. "Grandma," he whispered, "what is this?" Margaret slowly placed her cup down. "If I were really dead," she said, "you would already be rich. But here I am." Daniel turned to me in panic. "Rachel, what did you do? What is going on?" I stepped forward. "You are standing in a house that does not belong to you anymore." I said, "You never owned anything here." Gregory walked out of the shadows with a folder in his hands. "Good evening, Mr. Morgan," he said. "Allow me to explain your situation." Their vacation had just turned into their worst nightmare. Gregory opened the folder and began to speak in a calm, professional voice. He explained that Margaret Hale was the legal owner of the house, the land, and the company where Daniel worked. Daniel had only been given his job because of her kindness. Daniel tried to laugh it off, but his hands were shaking. Then Gregory told him that his accounts had already been frozen. His company had terminated his employment. His credit cards were canceled. Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at the screen in disbelief as notification after notification appeared. Fired. Account frozen, access denied. Linda began to cry. Olivia slowly stepped away from Daniel. Margaret watched them without emotion. "You left me to die," she said. "You poisoned me, you stole from me. Now you will face the consequences." The door to the side of the room opened. Police officers walked in. Daniel dropped to his knees. Linda screamed. Olivia tried to run, but a guard blocked her path. The officers read their rights and placed handcuffs on Daniel and Linda. Olivia was taken as an accomplice. I watched as the people who had ruined my life were led away. For the first time in years, I felt free. Their lies were over. Their power was gone, and the truth had finally caught up with them. 3 months later, the world looked very different for all of us. Daniel and Linda were no longer living in that comfortable house. They had no money, no car, and no one willing to help them. Their faces appeared in the local news as suspects in an elder abuse and financial crime case. They were released on bail while waiting for trial, but their lives had already collapsed. I saw them one afternoon while driving through the city. They were sitting on cardboard outside a closed store, wearing dirty clothes and arguing over a small box of leftover food. They looked older and weaker, nothing like the people who once controlled my life. Daniel saw my car and tried to chase after me. He shouted my name and begged for forgiveness. I did not stop. I did not look back. The woman who once cried herself to sleep was gone. In her place was someone who finally knew her worth. Sometimes justice does not come slowly. Sometimes it comes all at once and changes everything. 1 year later, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Daniel was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder, elder abuse, and financial crimes. Linda received 10 years for her role in poisoning and neglect. Olivia, who had testified against them, avoided a long sentence but lost everything she had. I did not feel joy when I heard the verdict. I felt something quieter and deeper: closure. Margaret Hale was now living peacefully in a beautiful home, surrounded by people who actually cared about her. Her health had improved, not because of medicine, but because she was finally safe. I had taken over leadership of her foundation, which helped abandoned seniors and struggling families. I was no longer just surviving. I was building something meaningful. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. Some wounds turn into wisdom. Some betrayals turn into strength, and some endings are really new beginnings. Margaret and I often sit together in the garden now, drinking tea and watching the sunlight move across the flowers. Sometimes she tells me stories about her youth. Sometimes we sit in silence. Both feel just as peaceful. One afternoon, she took my hand and thanked me for coming back that night. She said that if I had not returned when I did, her story would have ended very differently. I told her the truth that helping her had also saved me. It showed me that kindness is not weakness. It is power, real power. For anyone listening who feels trapped in a toxic family or a painful relationship, remember this. You are not powerless. You are not invisible, and you deserve respect. If this story touched you, please like and share it so more people can hear it. Subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more true-to-life stories about strength, justice, and healing. And in the comments, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Thank you for being here with me. See you next time.